Hello, my name is Nigel Thorne and I have concerns about the Welsh Government's RSE code that has been introduced for Welsh schools. The code has been drawn up by E.J. Reynolds, an academic from Cardiff University and proponent of queer theory. The new code requires schools to teach children about gender identity. So where did such an idea come from? The term gender identity was first coined in 1964 by Robert Stoller, a psychologist who worked with transsexual clients. It was a time when gender roles were much more socially prescribed. The term was used to refer to a hypothetical idea that an individual has a gender that relates to how they feel inside. The term was used again in 1980 within a publication by the American Psychiatric Association called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM. It was used in a description of the psychological malady of what was then known as gender identity disorder, the distress a person feels due to a mismatch between the personal sense of one's own gender and the biological sex. It was used as a descriptive term in a diagnosable medical condition. Kat Burton is a transsexual from Barry who came out as trans at the age of 58. She spent 45 years as an airline pilot before retiring at age 65. In an article for UK Aviation, Burton wrote, "In 1972, there were no women airline pilots in the UK. Yvonne Pope-Sint was about to break through that barrier. I am transgender. In 1972, British Airways actually did have a woman pilot, but at that time they didn't know it, and neither did I." Burton claims that in 1972, when she was a fully intact biological man, she presented as a man, was regarded by others, and even regarded by herself as a man. She was in fact a woman. Burton believes that she was born in the wrong body. I don't hate Kat Burton. I don't fear Kat Burton. I appreciate the medical transition has made Kat Burton a happier person. I'm happy to use female pronouns to refer to Kat Burton. However, I don't believe her subjective rationalisation is an objective fact. I believe it is a comforting fiction, masking a less comfortable truth. Ordinarily, that wouldn't be a problem. We live in a pluralistic society. Everyone is entitled to hold their own beliefs. However, Burton is not just a retired airline pilot. She is chair of trustees at GIAS, the trans lobby group, and does have significant influence. On 17th of March 2021, Burton gave evidence in front of the Women and Equalities Committee in Parliament.
Non-timely intervention for trans young people can be a lifelong tragedy. And I just wanted to say that, yes, the vast majority just need socialisation and support and talk. But at Tanner Stage 2, there is a very limited window of opportunity to prevent long-term damage from inappropriate puberty. And that's where puberty blockers are essential. And those puberty blockers really need to be prescribed at the onset of Tanner Stage 2. For those of you that don't know in detail what the Tanner stages are, Tanner Stage 2 is the first visible signs of puberty.
Regarding puberty blockers, the interim CAST report stated, in January 2020, a policy working group was established by NHS England to undertake a review of the published evidence on the use of puberty blockers and feminising, masculinising hormones in children and young people with gender dysphoria to inform a policy position on their future use. Unfortunately, the available evidence was not strong enough to form a basis of a policy position. I believe that Burton, in attempting to cement the comfortable fiction in her mind and in the mind of others, is advocating for a position that would compromise the health of young people. Dr. Az Hakim has spent many years working with transsexual clients. This is what he had to say about the interim CAST review.
The CAST review was much needed. I'm part of a network of clinicians who are all concerned about how gender dysphoria is treated in a very physical, bodily way rather than anything psychological. And so we as a group met with her, I met with her individually, and I don't think she was surprised by what we had to say. It's a medical anomaly in terms of treatment. And I think rather than this very closed shop where kids are being treated for gender but not anything else, even though they may also have autism, depression, trauma, all these things, those are ignored. I think that has to change. And I think we've got to reintegrate children's mental health into being their whole mental health and not just going, oh, okay, gender problem, gender clinic, nothing else. Because we're failing the children otherwise. The false doctrine that we're being led to believe is that they're safe, they're reversible, they'll put a harmless pause on puberty while the child has thinking time, who can then decide what they want to do with their gender. False. The other false narrative is if you don't give a gender-confused child puberty blockers, they're at high risk of suicide. False. No evidence for that. It's repeated again and again. If you repeat something again and again, it almost becomes like fact because you've heard it so many times. It's not fact. There's no evidence. What we do know is puberty blockers are not safe, they're not reversible, and they do have long-term effects. If you stop a child going through puberty, that'll further reinforce, surely, a sense of inadequacy about their own sex and gender. If your peers are going through pubertal changes but you're not, it'll reinforce the fact that you're not quite the same as them. We know that almost 100% of kids who go on puberty blockers then have sex reassignment. So it's a fait accompli. If you give someone a puberty blocker, they're going to have a sex change. So in a way, it's a prelude to it. It's not a pause. And what we also know is that if you're a pre-pubertal boy, this is a bit technical, but if you're a pre-pubertal boy and you haven't gone through puberty, and then you want to then have a sex change, to make a neo-vagina, you've got to invert the penis. You're not going to have a very big vagina because you haven't had a very big penis through puberty. So you have these non-functioning asexual bodies that we're creating. And it's not the happy ever after story that we're led to believe.
Robert Stoller would have said that Kat Burton had a gender identity disorder. Stoller is referred to in Gender Trouble. Butler writes, "The appearance of an abiding substance or gendered self, what the psychiatrist Robert Stoller refers to as a gender core, is thus produced by the regulation of attributes along culturally established lines of coherence." Butler took Stoller's hypothesis relating to a psychological condition and drew it into a sociological analysis that aimed to undermine heteronormativity, with gender being a domain of agency or freedom.
Think about how difficult it is for sissy boys, or how difficult it is for tomboys to function socially without being bullied or without being teased or without sometimes suffering threats of violence, or without their parents intervening to say, maybe you need a psychiatrist, or why can't you be normal? So, there are institutional powers like psychiatric normalization, and there are informal kinds of practices like bullying, which try to keep us in our gendered place. There's a real question for me about how such gender norms get established and policed, and what the best way is to disrupt them and to overcome the police function. It's my view that gender is culturally formed, but it's also a domain of agency or freedom, it's most important to resist the violence that is imposed by ideal gender norms, especially against those who are gender different, who are non-conforming in their gender presentation.
Butler believes that language itself is performing the policing function. Her solution is to change language. Now, although coming from different places, trans activists and queer theory proponents have formed a very influential alliance. Queer theorists like Emma Reynolds aim to challenge social prejudices. Its proponents are only tangentially concerned with the promotion of trans interests. They're engaged in a massive exercise in social engineering. They're changing language to downplay the significance of sex and elevate the significance of gender, to undermine the perception that heterosexuality is normal. Trans activists, like Kath Burton, aim to achieve social acceptance of a comfortable fiction. She believes she was born in a wrong body, so is invested in promoting the idea that she has a gender identity that is not in line with her sexed body. For queer theorists, an atypical gender identity, far from being a potential mental health issue, is a defiant resistance to idealised gender norms and something to be celebrated. Trans activists see in queer theory's call to defiantly act the gender they wish to be a justification for performing their preferred gender role.
I mean, I'd never even heard of transgender before the age of 40, and it was only when I was researching gender theory as part of my master's that I discovered all of this amazing science.
Kat Burton and Emma Reynolds are both members of the Welsh Government's highly influential LGBTQ+ expert panel. The goal of queer theory is to undermine the heterosexual matrix. The objective is to minimise the significance of sex and elevate the significance of gender. The desired outcome is for our young people to see themselves as gendered souls rather than sex bodies, and in this way undermine the social expectations that people have based on someone's sex. The consequence of this is that queer theory has given vulnerable young people a language that enables them to erroneously rationalise feelings of disembodiment. The result of all this is that the concept of an individual gender has been normalised in our children, and adults who have a responsibility for our children's welfare have been completely oblivious to the danger.
Since Agenda's launch in November 2016, we have embedded it into practice through outreach work in schools and youth groups and practitioner workshops at local, national and international levels. In the first year, Agenda has reached more than 3,000 young people and practitioners, and we've trained more than 40 Agenda youth ambassadors.
But what's important to me about Emma's work is that it draws on children's experiences. She works with children to develop her research and any materials coming out of it. She was selected by Welsh Government to lead an expert panel on sex and relationships education. They came out with a really quite transformative and far-reaching and quite radical set of suggestions last autumn. And our Cabinet Secretary for Education announced that she would be implementing the recommendations in full on a statutory basis in Wales.
And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the expert panel members and its chair, Professor Emma Reynolds, for their excellent work.
Agenda and its impact on society is the result of extensive long-term partnerships with schools, youth groups, third sector agencies, activists, artists and Welsh Government.
We are making changes.
We're exploring the development of a UK-wide version and strengthening Agenda's international reach.
On page 137 of the 2019 version of the Agenda resource, there is a link titled How to Take Action Against the Negative Media Stereotyping of LGBT+ Communities. The link takes you to a page on the Children's Commissioner for Wales website. The document has been removed, but it can be retrieved from archive. The document encourages young people to complain about negative media reporting. Within the document, in a section written by pupils from Digon, it states, how can young people who are questioning their gender make an informed decision if they can't relate to similar characters in the media? Why on earth should our children be questioning their gender? There are three parts to the human mind. We feel, we think, we believe. Youngsters believe what adults tell them because they haven't had the experience to allow them to make those judgments themselves. We will be lying to our children if we tell them that everybody has a gender that is distinct from their sex. Those of you who would prefer your child's school not to encourage your child to question their gender may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included below.